Good and evil are not external entities. They are levels of integration of the same force. The fundamental error is confusing a symbol with a sentence. No sign condemns anyone to having a bad character. Similarly, no sign guarantees virtue. What exists is a basic impulse that, when unobserved, tends to manifest in an exaggerated, defensive or compensatory way. This excess is what people call the negative side of the sign. In practice, this means the same energy that can generate courage, sensitivity, intelligence, or discipline can also generate violence, manipulation, scattering, or rigidity. How the zodiac signs shape character for good or for evil. Have you ever used your zodiac sign to justify a mistake, or heard someone say, "That's just who I am"? Today, I'm going to show you why that's the biggest lie you've ever been told about astrology. This title speaks directly to the most misunderstood point of astrology, and at the same time, its deepest philosophical core. Signs do not create character. When people say that signs shape character, most understand it in a superficial, almost cartoonish way. The common idea is that a sign makes someone good, evil, honest, manipulative, aggressive, or passive. This reading is false and reductionist. Signs do not create character. They describe how consciousness organizes itself, reacts, and expresses itself when it comes into contact with the world. Each sign represents a basic pattern of perception, a recurring way of responding to life. Character is born when this pattern is repeated, reinforced, and embodied over time. A mode of psychological functioning. Astrologically, a sign is not a moral label. It is a mode of psychological functioning. It describes how vital energy is organized, how a person perceives the world, reacts to experiences, and responds to the challenges of existence. Good or evil only arise when this structure is lived with awareness or on autopilot. Signs don't create character, they structure patterns of consciousness. Character is born from how these patterns are lived, integrated, or denied throughout life. Conscious vs. unconscious expression. There is no such thing as a good sign or a bad sign. There is only the conscious or unconscious expression of the same principle. Every sign carries a high potential and a corresponding shadow. When awareness is present, the sign manifests as virtue. When it is absent, it manifests as distortion. Good and evil are not in the symbol, but in the level of integration of consciousness. The power of choice. Every sign contains constructive potential and destructive potential, not as a moral duality, but as the possibility of maturity or distortion. The same impulse can generate courage or violence. The same sense of identity can generate leadership or arrogance. The same desire for security can generate responsibility or excessive control. The sign doesn't choose this, consciousness does. Signs as filters of experience. Signs function as filters of experience. They determine what a person notices first, what they tend to value, what they fear losing, and how they react under pressure. Character forms when these filters become automatic, when a person acts without observing themselves. Character forms when a person starts acting the same way in every situation, without questioning, reflecting, or taking responsibility for their choices. When this happens, the sign stops being an instrument of expression and becomes a psychological prison. A dark character is born from blind identification. When there is no self-knowledge, the sign dominates the person. When there is awareness, the person utilizes the sign. This is where the illusion of good and evil as something external arises. In reality, what we call the negative side of a sign is simply unintegrated psychic energy. It isn't malice. It's unconsciousness. A dark character is not born from the sign, but from blind identification with it, from the mechanical repetition of the same pattern without reflection, responsibility, or conscious choice. Character is born from unconscious repetition. Character is born from unconscious repetition. It isn't formed in a single act. It is built through repetition. When a psychological pattern repeats over time without reflection, it becomes identity. That's the point where the sign marks the character. For example, a sign whose basic structure involves initiative and affirmation can produce someone of integrity, direct, and courageous. But if lived without awareness, it can produce someone impulsive, authoritarian, or aggressive. The energy is the same. The result is different. Good and evil are levels of integration. Good and evil are not external entities. They are levels of integration of the same force. The fundamental error is confusing a symbol with a sentence. No sign condemns anyone to having a bad character. Similarly, no sign guarantees virtue. What exists is a basic impulse that, when unobserved, tends to manifest in an exaggerated, defensive, or compensatory way. This excess is what people call the negative side of the sign. In practice, this means the same energy that can generate courage, sensitivity, intelligence, or discipline can also generate violence, manipulation, scattering, or rigidity. The difference lies in awareness, signs of action and identity. Signs of action and identity possess energy naturally geared toward movement. When integrated, the person develops a firm character, moral courage, leadership ability, and responsibility for their decisions. When unintegrated, bad character emerges as constant impulsivity, an inability to admit mistakes, a need to dominate others, and justifying aggression as having a strong personality. Bad character in this case doesn't come from strength, but from a lack of self-regulation. The person acts without reflecting and then outsources the blame. Signs linked to value and connection. Signs linked to value and connection have great potential for empathy, care, and ethical sensitivity. When mature, they develop loyalty, emotional justice, and the ability to create healthy bonds. When immature, they can develop emotional dependency, manipulation, and psychological blackmail. Bad character appears when the need for affection turns into controlling others. Here, the problem isn't loving too much, but failing to recognize one's own internal value. The person begins to demand from others what they haven't built within themselves. Signs linked to the mind and communication. Signs linked to the mind and communication can form extremely lucid, curious, and ethical individuals. When integrated, they develop mental clarity and intellectual honesty. When lived without awareness, they generate scattering, constant lying, the rationalization of unethical behavior, and the use of words as a tool for deception. In this case, bad character arises when intelligence is used to justify anything, including actions that hurt others. The mind stops serving the truth and starts serving the ego. Signs linked to expansion and belief. Signs linked to expansion and belief can form wise, ethical, and inspiring individuals. When conscious, they develop moral integrity and respect for diverse perspectives. When unconscious, they turn into fanatics, dogmatists, or become morally arrogant. Bad character arises when the belief becomes more important than concrete human reality. Here, the distortion happens when the person believes their worldview makes them superior to others. Signs linked to structure and limits. Signs linked to structure and limits have enormous potential to form a solid, reliable, and ethical character. When integrated, they develop discipline, commitment, and emotional maturity. When unintegrated, they generate rigidity, emotional coldness, authoritarianism, and excessive judgment. Bad character appears when the fear of making mistakes turns into a need to control everything and everyone. In this case, the person acts out of fear, not ethics. Symbolic astrology reveals where responsibility begins. It is fundamental to understand that the sign doesn't push anyone toward evil. It merely exposes where a person tends to lose themselves if they aren't conscious. A bad character is born when a person completely identifies with their dominant impulse and loses the ability to observe themselves. They start saying, "I'm just like that," as a justification for any behavior. This is the most dangerous point of misunderstood astrology. When someone uses their sign to justify destructive attitudes, they aren't practicing astrology, they are practicing the avoidance of responsibility. Symbolic astrology does the opposite. It reveals where responsibility begins. Awareness transforms a pattern into a virtue. Awareness transforms a pattern into a virtue. When there is awareness, the sign stops being an automatism and becomes a tool. The person notices their impulses before acting. They observe their emotional reactions. They question their own thoughts. In this process, the character is refined. Aggression turns into courage. Sensitivity turns into empathy. Discipline turns into wisdom. Curiosity turns into discernment. Good does not arise from denying the impulse, but from its conscious integration. True bad character is the refusal to look at oneself. True bad character, from a symbolic point of view, isn't about being intense, emotional, rational, or ambitious. True bad character is the refusal to look at oneself. It's blaming the sign, the chart, the transit, or the planet for choices that are internal. It's using the symbol as an excuse to remain unconscious. It's repeating destructive patterns and calling it destiny. This is one of the greatest proofs that signs don't determine character. Two people with the same symbolic structure can manifest completely different levels of maturity. One becomes an ethical reference, the other becomes a source of conflict. What changes isn't the sign, it's the level of consciousness. Astrology shows the terrain. Character shows how that terrain was cultivated. The real work is taking responsibility. When understood correctly, astrology doesn't serve to classify people but to educate consciousness. It reveals where each individual tends to fail, exaggerate, defend, or hide. The real work isn't avoiding the negative side of the sign but taking responsibility for it. It's realizing that every impulse demands maturity. Character is revealed under pressure. Character is revealed under pressure. Character doesn't show up when everything is comfortable. It emerges in moments of frustration, loss, conflict, and limits. It is in these moments that the symbolic pattern of the sign manifests most strongly. A person with a strong impulse for control reveals their character when things don't go as planned. They either react with rigidity or learn to trust. A person with a strong need for recognition reveals their character when they aren't validated. They either fall into resentment or strengthen their internal identity. A person with a tendency to flee reveals their character when reality demands commitment. They either disappear or mature. The sign indicates how a person reacts when the ego is confronted. Character is born from that reaction repeated over time. Virtue is not the negation of impulse. Virtue is not the negation of impulse. There is a mistaken idea that virtue means suppressing natural desires, emotions, or impulses. This is false. Virtue, from a symbolic perspective, is the conscious use of energy. When someone tries to deny their own sign, they create an even more destructive shadow. Character deteriorates not because the impulse exists, but because it is repressed or projected. The person who represses anger becomes passive-aggressive. The one who represses the desire for control becomes manipulative. The one who represses the need for affection becomes needy and invasive. Character is strengthened when the impulse is recognized, named, and directed. The shadow of the sign is a moral laboratory. The shadow of the sign is a moral laboratory. Every sign has a shadow. Not as something evil, but as an unlit territory of consciousness. The shadow is where the individual acts without realizing it. It is exactly there that character is molded. When someone ignores their shadow, it governs their actions. When they recognize it, it transforms into a source of maturity. Symbolic astrology doesn't condemn the shadow. It uses it as a moral laboratory. Every unconscious pattern is an opportunity for ethical refinement. Character is not fixed. A common mistake is believing that character is fixed. It isn't. Character fluctuates according to the level of awareness present in each situation. A person considered good can act destructively when reacting automatically to an unintegrated pattern. This doesn't invalidate their essence, but it reveals a blind spot. The sign shows exactly where that blind spot tends to appear. The difference between someone who matures and someone who degrades morally isn't the absence of flaws, but the ability to recognize the error without justifying it. Using astrology as an excuse is immaturity. When someone says, "I'm like this because of my sign," they are giving up their own power of choice. This phrase is a clear sign of psychological immaturity. The sign doesn't take away freedom, it demands responsibility. Using astrology as an excuse is one of the greatest signs of symbolic bad character. Not because the person is evil, but because they chose not to grow. True astrology confronts, it does not comfort the ego. Good character is born from internal vigilance. Good character is not born from perfection, but from internal vigilance. It is built when a person observes their impulses before acting, questions their motivations, and accepts limits. Astrologically, this means living the sign at its highest level. The impulse for action transforms into ethical courage. The desire for connection transforms into loyalty. The need for control transforms into responsibility. The search for meaning transforms into wisdom. None of this happens automatically. The sign offers the material, consciousness creates the work. Personality versus character. Personality is how a person expresses themselves. Character is how they choose to act when no one is looking. Astrology describes personality. Character is built in relationship to that description. Two people can have the same basic personality and opposite characters. One observes themselves, the other justifies themselves. That is the dividing line. Astrology as applied ethics. When understood correctly, astrology becomes a form of ethics applied to daily life. It doesn't tell you what will happen, but it shows how you tend to react to what happens. And it is in that reaction that character is revealed. The true study of the sign begins when a person asks, where do I repeat? Where do I exaggerate? Where do I flee? Where do I justify myself? These questions aren't moralistic, they are liberating. Signs do not produce saints or monsters. Signs don't produce saints or monsters, they produce possibilities. Good arises when the individual takes responsibility for their own pattern. Evil arises when they hide behind it. Astrology doesn't judge, it reveals. And every revelation demands a choice. Therefore, character is not written in the stars. It is written silently in the way each human being responds to their own impulses, day after day, awareness after awareness. This is the point where astrology stops being a belief and becomes a path. And it is exactly here that true self-knowledge begins. In the end, signs don't determine who someone is. In the end, signs don't determine who someone is. They show how someone can lose or find themselves within. And it is exactly there that astrology stops being superstition and reveals itself as a profound philosophy of human character. When a person constantly depends on predictions, they train their psyche to look outward before looking inward. This creates a mental habit of outsourcing. The decision isn't born from presence, it's born from expectation. And every expectation weakens the now. Illusion comforts, light disturbs, but only light awakens. A world with more conscious people is not built by offering ready-made answers about the future, but tools to observe the present. Illusion promises control. Lucidity demands responsibility. That is why illusion sells more. Astrology, when misused, becomes a psychological anesthetic. It calms momentary anguish but prevents maturation. When used well, it does the opposite. It pulls the rug out, dismantles certainties, and returns power to the individual. Awakening is perceiving how you are reacting now. Awakening isn't knowing what will happen tomorrow. It's perceiving how you are reacting right now. Those who seek prediction want security. Those who seek awareness accept the risk of seeing themselves, and seeing oneself hurts, but it sets you free. To give light is not to please, it is to reveal. To give light is not to please, it is to reveal. And revealing always breaks some illusion. So, yes. If we want people to be more awake, we need to be honest with them, even if it displeases, even if it provokes, even if it disturbs. Illusion creates followers, light forms individuals.